Welcome back to our yet another tutorial, and yes, today we are going to look at one of the most important concepts in software engineering, or in Laravel specifically. And today what are we looking at? What we call the Laravel relationships. We are going to first talk about these relationships in their theory, so that now later on we are going to look at them practically, because now it is so important for these Laravel relationship to understand them theoretically before you can code them. And what I want you to note is that with this Laravel relationship, it is so important for you to understand them, because they are going to be quite useful in your next tutorials or in your next software development stage, because without you understanding them, it's going to be very, very hard for you to develop them. So that's why I want to first of all explain them theoretically before I can now go ahead to code them, so that you can see. So we are going to begin with first of all understanding what are relationships when it comes to Laravel. So relationships in Laravel, they just help us define how tables are connected in your database. For example, you might have a table, and one table, let's say it's user, and then say the other table is called the posts. Now you're going to realize that as a user, assuming let's say we are developing a blog app, a user is going to have, let's say, many posts. So we are going to see a user posting today and is posting tomorrow. So where does this table go? Rather, where does this data go? It goes, let's say, in the post table. But these posts are being posted by the user. So now, instead of you writing these complex SQL statements, Laravel lets you define this directly in your models. But we're going to look at that. Do not worry as of now. And now the other thing may be what you need to understand. Why do we need relationships in Laravel? Why do we need them? Number one, for us to be able to write clean code, we need relationships. Of course, I will explain in the due process when we start our practical session for the relationships. But for now, just know that the reason that's why we need these relationships, it's because we need some clean code. The other thing that you might talk about is for database retrieval. For example, you can simply just use one table, or you can simply use one model to pick all the data where this model has participated. For example, I do not need to point at, let's say, posts table. In case I point at a user model, I can simply pick now from this user model, I can pick all the posts that this person has posted in the posts table. So that's why we are using relationships. Then the other thing, the reason that's why we are using relationships in Laravel, we want to avoid the manual SQL joins. Of course, if you're coming from the background where you started database programming, you're going to realize that you wrote some SQL queries or statements for you to join data to do ABCD. But with Laravel, you don't need to hassle with all that. We just have a simplest way of joining or writing SQL joins. Then the other thing, it works well with Eloquent ORM. What is ORM? ORM refers to object relational mapping. Of course, I will explain this further as we shall begin our Laravel tutorials or practical sessions when we are working with these actual relationships. Now, having understood one, what are relationships in Laravel, we have already defined that. Secondly, why do we need the relationships in Laravel? It's what I've just explained. Now, the other thing that we're going to talk about now are what we call the types of relationships in Laravel. We're going to talk about some of the types of relationship in Laravel. Of course, some of the things you have covered them in, let's say, in object-oriented programming. You have covered a lot in other programming course units. But in this as well, we are going to look at these types, and we shall be using some of the examples for you to understand better. So one of the first type that I'm going to begin with is what we call the one-to-one relationship. So there is a type which is referred to as a one-to-one relationship, which I can use. For example, let me just open this, and I first explain using this diagram. Now, basing on this, these are what we call the class diagrams. If you haven't yet forgotten your database programming knowledge, these are what we call the class diagrams, and you can see there is a class here, and it has these attributes. You can see we have the attribute ID, the email, and the name. as well as this posts class, it has the ID, the title, the content, and the author ID. Now what is happening here, this is what we refer to as a one-to-one, rather a one-to-many relationship. How does it happen? You're going to realize that what they are referring to as to one-to-many, we can have one user, let's say that user, let's say is Mosh, but is having many posts. For example, those that have used the TikTok before, when you're posting your videos, now treat yourself as a user. But when you check your channel or when you check your account, we might find there a number of videos or posts that you have ever posted there. So that implies that you're trying to implement what we call a one-to-many relationship. Why? You as a one user, you have many posts on your account. That's what we call a one-to-many relationship, being our first example. So we can use this to explain what a one-to-many relationship looks like. Do not worry, we are going to look at it practically as we shall be coding. But for now, I want you to first of all understand what are these relationships and what do they do when it comes to software engineering. So away from that first example, let's talk about the next example, and the next type is what we call the one-to. Now, the first one that we looked at is what we call the one-to-one relationship. Sorry, I was explaining the one-to-many instead of a one-to-one. Let me just explain this. Now, this is a one-to-one relationship. Now, in Laravel, we have a one-to-one relationship, yeah, which is our first example, yeah. Now, a one-to-one relationship, of course, these are still classes, and these are classes, and these are the attributes. Now, we're going to see that a one user has what we call one phone number. So we can't see that, let's say, one user is having many phone numbers, or a one user having many emails. So that's what we call a one-to-one relationship, where we have one user having one phone, maybe one user having one email, one user having one national ID. So that's what we call a one-to-one relationship. Now, from a one-to-one relationship, now let me go to this one-to-many, which I was explaining as a one-to-one. Now, there's what we call a one-to-many relationship, where we have a single user, which is this, having many posts. For example, one user is having many posts, as you can see here. That's what we call a one-to-many relationship, being our second example. Now, from one-to-many, we have the other example, which is a many-to-many relationship. Now, how do we implement a many-to-many relationship? Now, we can have an example like here. You can see a student can enroll in many courses. Yeah, we have a many-to-many relationship. You see, for example, you are a student, but you have many courses. So we can see a lot of students enrolling to many courses, or courses have many students. That's what we call a many-to-many relationship. Already we have many students. Let's say BBC class, there are over 500 students, but there are also over maybe 38 courses that they have enrolled in. So we have a many-to-many relationship implemented there. So now that's our third example. We started with one-to-one relationship, where we saw a one user having one email, a one user having one phone number, a one user having one profile, a one user having, let's say, one national ID. But then we went to a one-to-many relationship, where we saw that a one user can have many posts. For example, using your TikTok account, you're a one user, but you're having many posts. Then from one to many, there is what we call many-to-many, where we have seen that many students can enroll in many courses. So that's what we call a many-to-many relationship. And lastly, the other last example is what we call the hasMany through. But this is a little bit advanced, but very useful. So there's what we call hasMany but through. Now let me just use this example of countries, users, and posts. So now this is how you implement a hasMany through relationship. That this one country, a person belonging to a particular country, let's say country 2, let's say that country is Uganda. Now we can see that with country Uganda, we can have, let's say, maybe more than 2 users, or more than 2 people who are coming from Uganda. But these two people have like a number of posts. For example, we have many TikTokers in Uganda. Now, those TikTokers in Uganda are representing us, let's say Uganda, but they are about, let's say, 5. But when we check their account, each has, let's say, 1,000 posts there. Now, we can implement that hasMany through using what we call this example, that it has many, this one country, it has many users, but those users have got many posts that they have posted. That's what we call a hasMany through relationship. Now, when you do not understand this, of course, with development, it might look a little bit quite hard because it's not just obvious the way you're just seeing it here. But the moment you understand these things now, it will be very, very important and very key as you shall be developing a serious application. So I wanted you to understand this theoretical part before you can look at the practical part. Maybe I can cite a real life example maybe for you to understand maybe these. For example, we can have an example of a patient has many appointments. That's one example. That has many. Yeah, a patient might have many appointments. Also, as well as a doctor might have many appointments. But an appointment belongs to a patient or a doctor. You see, an appointment belongs to a patient. So one appointment will belong to one patient. But we can't have one appointment belonging to many. No, it is a single person making an appointment. But we can have many patients, rather one patient having many appointments. So I think I was trying to give you that summary and maybe to just brief you about what we have just looked at. Relationships, for them, just know that they connect your data in the database. Now, instead of you coding these things manually, with Laravel, you can simply connect whatever data that you want to connect. But these relationships are defined in the models. So if you want to define your database, rather your relationships, just know that we're going to be declaring them in the models. And types of these relationships we have looked at, we have the hasOne, the hasMany, the belongsTo, and belongsToMany. But these ones fall under the other types that we have looked at, the one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, and hasMany through. But in Laravel, we don't write them as one-to-one, one-to-many. We simply have types, for example, hasOne, hasMany, belongsTo, and belongsToMany. Now, these 4 categories, they help us define or represent the other first categories that we have talked about. So I think I first explained the theory part. Let me wait and you have the practical part in our next video. So let's catch up in our next video. Thank you.